three key questions. One, how from an organizational perspective do you start thinking about the drivers and the benefits of actually going to a single source of truth? Elizabeth's going to talk about that. How do you then start to prepare for it? How do you start to build the business case? How do you start to get organizational buy-in? In New Balance's presentation just before, interesting twist in their journey around that on their executives. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then last but not least, how do you continue to roll this out across the organization? And Elizabeth's going to talk about some very interesting roles that they have created along to help along that journey, but also some of the governance changes that organizationally are a little bit more difficult to try and get adopted. So Elizabeth, let's first talk about kind of the benefits that you guys saw in actually going to PIM and moving towards that single source of truth.
Yeah, absolutely. So our PIM journey started back in 2017. We had launched or just revamped our product website. So we had a lot of content that went into that. We had new photos, we had new marketing copy, we were loading spec sheets in, we were loading a lot of content into our website. And so our web team was responsible in working with our different functions throughout our company to collect that information and then put it into the web platform. And then also on the agenda in 2017 was a digital specification platform, which, to no surprise, also required images in marketing content, in spec sheets, and technical information. And so they collected that content and put it in that platform. And so then a digital spec and a digital solutions team was overseeing that. And then last but not least, we had an e-commerce project where we onboarded another product data manager who was specifically responsible for getting data to our partners, our distribution partners, so that they could sell our products more effectively. And so we have a very wide breadth of plumbing products, but all within the plumbing space. And so we brought on a product data manager to help promote these products and collect information for these products within our channels. And so we identified about 1,000 SKUs that we were going to go and collect more enriched content on. And again, it was tapping the same type of content. It was images and marketing copy and technical details and information, spec sheets. And we were storing that in a separate table within in a bunch of Excel files to provide to our partners. And so, come mid-2017, the IT and the digital marketing group said, time out, we've got a data problem. We're not moving effectively. We're having to store this information in 3 separate key platforms, but it's really foundationally all the same thing. So we were actually working with Perficient prior to our PIM journey, and so they had helped us with our digital spec platform and also with some of our other divisions. And so when our IT and our digital marketing leadership had brought this forth to Perficient, they said, a lot of other manufacturers in the space are moving towards a PIM platform to solve these problems. So that's when we really started to undertake our PIM journey. So we knew we had to move in the age of e-commerce and digital spec and whatnot, and we had to move quickly with our products that we were coming to market with. So we wanted to see speed and be able to give enough information to that consumer to make the decision to buy that product on the spot. So whether they're looking on Amazon or they're looking on Ferguson, which is a huge distributor for us, they've got an online platform with more enriched content and information for them. In that process, also reducing all the operational inefficiencies we were having and having to collect this information, validate it with different teams, hope it's up to date because it's not really coming from any other source of truth. So we had a lot of copy-paste and data manipulation that was needed across these different platforms. It's no secret that we sell our products on Amazon today. You can go onto Amazon and search for Zurn, and you'll see a handful, or not just a handful. We have plenty of products out there on Amazon. And so when we were starting to take more control of our listings on Amazon, because we had other sellers actually listing our products on Amazon and then fulfilling them, we started to take ownership of our listings and therefore had access to the Amazon vendor portal. So we decided to do a POC where we took 15 SKUs across different product categories within our business. We took about 2 months to create this more enhanced content working with product marketing and our creative services team to make sure the branding looked right. And then also improve the content that was just on the product pages, the marketing features and benefits and images and whatnot. And so we took 2 months, collected that information, and then published A+ content and updated those product pages on Amazon. And we had done analysis to see, because we had 2+ years of sales data there, you know, our business is very seasonal, so we had to look year over year for the same month. What was the expected trend of sales, because we were growing anyways, but what was the expected trend of sales supposed to be? And then we took a benchmark there and said, okay, now that we've published this content, do we see that trend going much higher than we expected? And so it took about 6 months for us to see that turnaround from when we had published that A+ content to really see that increased sales from that content. And we had seen, I think it was 16.7%. We had seen increased sales just on those SKUs just because of the content. So that we had expected it maybe would grow 20%, the SKUs year over year, but they actually grew 36.7%, and we attribute that additional sales to the enhanced content. I mean, we had published it, being the manufacturer, the truth is on us to provide on those channels that this is the right, that we provide the right data there and the correct technical specifications to give confidence to the consumer to buy. So as they're looking through that product page and they're like, yeah, I trust this is what I really need, then they'll buy it. So it really validated that we were heading in the right direction with PIM and having a single source of truth and then being able to syndicate that information out. I mean, we did this for 15 SKUs on one channel. What if we did this for most or thousands of SKUs across all of our channels? What would that impact be? Huge, right? So, so we decided to, and it was a great factor to bring towards leadership of why we're spending so much time on content collection and focus on getting this data to our partners and why it's important. So unfortunately, the POC that we did, technically we were doing that at the same time as us building the business case. So by the time we actually had sign off on the business case, we didn't quite have the POC done. But to get the leadership buy-in, I mean, we brought in, when we did our tool selection, we brought in many different PIM vendors and ultimately ended up with Inriver and looked at a few key factors that really drove the leadership to agree to implement a PIM system. So one being that we were going to be able to improve our data quality and improve our conversion because we would have better data on our product pages. So it would give more confidence to the consumer to buy the product. We'd also be faster in putting SKUs to market with our channels. Today, or previously, we didn't have a way to easily identify what SKUs need to go to which channel and then send that information in an effective and more automated way. It was very manual and all Excel driven, and we would hope the distributor would onboard the SKUs, and there was just a lot of follow-up there. So we should have been faster on putting these SKUs to market. And we also saw a lot of operational efficiencies too. We had put soft cost savings towards how much time the creative services team was taking and manipulating data for the catalog. How much time was the web team taking and manipulating data for a website? How much time was the digital solutions team taking and manipulating data for the digital spec platform? It sounds like not that much, but over time, it added up with all the different functions that were actually manipulating data to meet their needs. So that was a pretty strong business case of the leadership that we had to move in this direction. And luckily, the POC just validated that fact.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So we engaged with you. Project got approved. You made the case, right? Organization said yes. They signed off. We engaged with you on an initial discovery and a requirements kind of analysis session. Mm-hmm. Spent a couple weeks getting the data model right, and then we did an implementation for you. And you guys kind of wanted to slow roll this a little bit just to make sure that this was going to go well, that you were going to be able to measure things the right way, but also be able to roll it out organizationally as well. So talk a little bit about, once we implemented this for you, kind of the role that you guys took around the stabilization aspect of this before actually rolling it out across the organization.
Yeah, so as I'd mentioned, we have a lot of digital platforms that wanted to use the data from PIM, but the initial approach we took to our implementation is let's just stand up the PIM platform first. Let's get that and have at least all of the data that we've collected through our Excel files and custom tables in our ERPs, and we're even taking in some other information from our ERP, but let's have at least the ERP feeding our information to PIM to make sure our product SKUs are correct that are coming in, and then let's not worry about the endpoint channels yet. To be candid, I mean, we're not a software development company. We're a plumbing manufacturer, so we're not in the business of creating a bunch of APIs to talk with our distributors. So we were also looking for the Syndicate platform, which I know Tomas will talk to later today, to help us with getting the data files ready and transmitting that data to our partners before we kind of took that next step to integrate downstream. So our initial launch was really, it's more on the conservative side, where we just made sure the marketing model was right, stood up the platform, educated our business users on the purpose of PIM, and drove adoption.
Fantastic. So, PIM's ready, stabilizing, getting it ready to roll out across the organization, but first, understanding who's going to do the work, right? And how the roles are going to change in order to be able to make this successful. So you guys decided to create some specific roles around this, retask some folks within the organization to take on some new responsibilities, give them some opportunities. Talk a little bit about that, and then a little bit also about just some of the process changes that you guys had to adopt in order to make this successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So with launching PIM, we were storing more data than we've ever stored before for our products. And you can imagine a faucet's going to be drastically different from a floor drain or a backflow preventer. So we were storing a lot of data, and the way that our business is structured is we have different business units that are responsible for the specific line of products and the content around it. So what we had identified with now is storing all of this information out in the marketing model. Somebody has to do the care and feeding of this information and the coordination within that business unit to get this information into PIM. I'm based in Milwaukee. It's actually not at one of our business units. Our business units are kind of geographically spread out. So it didn't make a lot of sense for me to drive that within each of the business units. So we identified, okay, well, let's say if we stand up a lead data steward in each of the business units, what would that look like? So we said, well, that individual is going to need to have to know the products extremely well. They're going to have to understand that product line, the intricacies around the different types of products and what type of information we would store against it. They have to understand our part numbers very well. They have to understand, what parts go into our ERP system and the finished goods that are ultimately created from them. And then they also had to be able to work cross-functionally on site with our product management teams and our marketing teams and our engineering groups and our operations group to collect that information and put it into PIM. So when we were looking at, okay, ideally this individual is going to help drive data collection within that business unit working cross-functionally. Is there anybody that we would have in these business units today that could fit that role? And it really came down to our parts and in BOM setup teams, our BOM being a bill of material setup teams. And a lot of them had kind of been in their role and been creating items and new finished goods, but were looking for their next challenge, right? Where's an opportunity for me to continue to expand in the data space? And it totally made sense for them to take on this new lead data steward role where they basically oversaw the full product data lifecycle, you could call it, right? So from when we create a new part in our system to when we put a bill of material together to manufacture it, and then ultimately when it goes to our channels. They have visibility throughout that whole life cycle, though they're not necessarily the ones responsible for delivering it to the channels, but they're going to make sure that data is ready so that it can go to those channels. So, so we identified that in each business unit we're going to have a lead data steward, then we had some data coordinators to support beneath them to help collect information and help track and fill in any gaps and do research with teams on information that we maybe had in catalogs or engineering technical sheets but wasn't stored in a more structured format.
That came with some organizational change as well. Good opportunities for those folks, right? And now you've got 𝐬𝐨𝑠 embedded inside of the team that the rest of the business units can actually go to get this. So Great story, Elizabeth. Last thing is, as we're kind of counting down on time here, and I always love ending with this question, and that is, if you could do one thing over again in the project as you went through the journey, what would it be?
We should have identified that these data stewards need to be onboarded sooner. I think it would have been great to take them along the process that we took to implement PIM so they understood kind of the intricacies of the model, and then have them be more embedded into that training process up front and have them answer have their questions answered by the Perficient team and whatnot up front versus later on. I think we were a little late to the game in identifying that we had to make this move. So if I had to do it again, I would have gotten that organizationally structured before we had launched PIM. Unfortunately, it kind of coincided with the launch of PIM, which made a very stressful month to launch PIM and then have an organizational change happening at the same time.
That's great. Where do you sit today with it?
With PIM, yeah, so we launched PIM back in June. And so we launched PIM back in June, and we're now working on the plan to syndicate information, so probably starting with our website, and then working with the Syndicate platform to syndicate that content out to channels. So first, a lot of our distributors, they don't necessarily have APIs that we can tap into yet, so even being able to take the data from our PIM model and have a file pop out with that information saves a lot of time on our end. So that's our path forward at the moment.
Fantastic. Great story, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for sharing. Elizabeth and I will be available for questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.